So what we'll do, David, is you're going to do a gem,
Yeah.
and then we're going to go to the post game, patreon.com/TMBS. Hit the like button. David Griscom, what do we got?
Yeah. I needed to highlight how serious these job numbers that came out earlier this past week were. In April, around 20 million jobs were shed. And just like to put in context what's happened since this coronavirus crisis has hit this country, the level of total employment in the economy is now at the level that it was in 2000. So that's 20 years, 2 decades of economic growth and job growth that has become, completely evaporated through this crisis. And there's another really frustrating or frightening aspect to the jobs report that came out, because it showed that wages actually grew on average. Well, the reason for that was because the people at the bottom portion of the society, the low wage workers, those were the first people to get their jobs cut, right? Because so they called off so many low wage workers in this mass unemployment, mass firings that have been happening over the past month and a half. So much so that like the actual average wage increased, right? I mean, just think about like the devastation that's created. But now we're at in a situation where obviously there is a crisis. People aren't going to work. People are losing income, but that doesn't mean that people are no longer consuming. That doesn't mean that people don't still have needs, right? So we're in this, this crisis, and obviously the solution for socialists or people with, honestly, like a brain or a heart is simple, right? It's like you need to give people access to income and access to the basic necessities of life. Well, in a neoliberal system that we have, that is almost impossible, right? Just because the institutions that we have created, the politicians who are in power, are so against that idea. You see it certainly with the Republicans, but even with the Democrats and how they're trying to deal with, this crisis. So, this whole, there's this massive unemployment crisis that's going on, and what are people doing about it? What is the government doing about it? It's certainly not doing enough, and it creates this really weird situation. Where there's basically two sides of TINA, two sides of there is no alternative, right? There's like the Democrat side, which is like, we're not going to basically provide the mass amount of stimulus that goes directly to people that is necessary, right? But, we're basically going to ask people to make massive sacrifices by staying at home. And then there's like the far right, death cult Republican side, my home state of Texas, for example, which is now massively opening up these states. And I wanted to just make it very clear to people that like the reopening of these states is not about the economy, obviously. But you can see how ineffective it is just like on a basic, like cold calculated numbers level of how inefficient the kind of reopening plan is in Texas. So, Texas has been one of the boldest states when it comes to reopening. And, one of the big things that they focused on was reopening restaurants, reopening entertainment, movie theaters, and things like that. But, there's so many rules that go with it, to protect people's health, obviously, in this crisis. So restaurants are operating at 25% capacity. And if you spend any time in the service economy or in a restaurant economy, you will understand that is not a viable way to run a restaurant. Similar rules when it comes to movie theaters, all of these things. It's purely symbolic on a certain level, what's going on there, right? It's not going to reinvigorate the economy. But you know what it is going to do? It's going to push off a whole section of people off of unemployment benefits. Because now them staying home is actually choosing to not go into work.
Yep.
And a lot of people who I know personally last week, they got those calls that like, you either come back to work or, we're going to say that you have basically left your position and you refuse the job. So what does that do? It's labor discipline on a mass scale, because they still need to hyper exploit workers. They still need people to come in and to go to the meatpacking facilities, which, by the way, has been one of the worst hit across this country. But I know in Texas, in Amarillo, for example, there's been a massive outbreak at a Tyson plant that has been very much underreported. These are the people who are providing the food supply to people, and they are already the worst affected by the COVID crisis. There's been massive reinfections in the construction industry, across the board, right? So, this is one, about labor discipline, and two, it's about it's really it's labor discipline, both in the sense of like trying to make people go back into work, right, and so that they can be exploited by those industries, the like the very precarious ones. Um, but it's also it's really is a powerful way to prevent us from being able to demand or imagine anything different, right? Because it's very simple what could and should be done in this country to take care of people, and by forcing everyone back into work in the way that they're doing across the country, across the South and a lot of other states in the U.S., they're going to push this crisis into such. It's going to wage like the devastation is going to be so focused on people who are already exposed financially, people who are already exposed health-wise. Hell, I even forgot to mention just the devastation that's going across elder homes across the country.
Oh God!
I mean, it's like it's some horrible stuff that is going to be
horrible.
happening. It's already horrible what's been happening, since this has started. But I mean, it's just like it's very clear, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, that there are two sides that are in power in the system, right? There's this Republican side that will use every weapon. They are the hammer of neoliberal capital, right? They will put people in the front lines and they will expose them to the worst and most dangerous situations. But then the other alternative is this Democratic Party, which is basically the other functionary, because like if you don't provide people with their basic needs to survive, then honestly, the only option is to reopen the economy and to like expose everyone to this danger. I'm not advocating that, but like if you're not giving anyone another credible option, then that's the only thing that can be done, right? So we're still in this crisis, and any kind of fantasy that we're getting out of it or things are slowing down is completely wrong. There's a serious potential of another massive wave, and it's very clear that we're not going to get any salvation from those above us. We're not going to get any help from politicians, and the kind of on the ground organizing and understanding the power that we have in society is very important, because all of those people who are being forced back into work, basically they're being hit really hard with the fist of the state, so that they don't realize that they actually do hold the power in society, and we need to be making sure that we don't let the powerful achieve their goal.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's really key that people understand that it's paying out unemployment benefits is the major key reason that these Republican governors are pushing people back to work. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that on a bipartisan basis, they do not want people to learn to expect or live with anything better. Mm-hmm. And that's why, with Democrats, they'll be like a pittance, and again, even things like sure, don't pay rent or pay your loans at the moment, but nothing to do with forgiveness, debt jubilees. We could be erasing medical debt, erasing student debt, we could be erasing credit card debt. I mean, there's an enormous amount that we could be doing right now to just reset the economy and do an enormous amount of good for tens of millions of people. That is a keystroke. And that's not on the table politically. And part of the reason it's not on the table politically is because they don't want your expectation sets to increase. Yeah. And that's really why, again, that was another really important way of understanding Bernie and why that was so important. I'm not trying to bring folks down, but the debate, we've talked a million times about why the debate about whether he's radical or not was a silly way of looking at it. Because the truth was that in our moment, even that agenda that might have economically been in the mainstream in the 50s, that people might have seen as a logical consequence, that you could have had a moderate, and certainly hawkish, a broad Democrat like Harry Truman, but who understood that everybody needed to have healthcare, as an example. And in today's world, that is considered extreme because, capital is so consolidated, workers are so undercut, and that is partially how we have to understand where we're at today. And again, another thing that you're right, David, when you said earlier, maybe there's potential because they can't do what they want to do in terms of like revving up more bubbles. There isn't an obvious way. There isn't a way I can see that is analogous to either the tech bubble in the 90s or, the housing bubble before it crashed that can like sort of juice a lot of people's incomes. I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is that, I mean, you certainly could juice people's incomes, but you'd actually have to do redistributive policies and you have to get rid of people's debt, as an example. And they don't want to do that. And I think that, you know, that creates a situation where there is a certain structural tendency towards the hammer side, because the more soft side can't really do very much right now. And that's a reason that we're in a very dangerous moment among many others.
And I think what's really frightening too, just to put a cherry on it, is that, you know, the hammer side, I think, like, won't work. Not only like it won't work in that it won't be able to even maintain the kind of living standards of like the ruling class elite, right? The destruction of small businesses across the country that's happening right now is going to have a massive effect for everybody. So it's just like they are actually, it's like this is like the last stand kind of moment here, where they actually will prevent any kind of alternative from springing out of this, just to maintain like the even smaller. I guess what I'm saying is like the group that's benefiting from this action is getting smaller and smaller and smaller,
right,
with each crisis.
Oh, that is 100% true, and that's yeah. There's no doubt about that. And I am aware that I said taxidermy by mistake earlier. So good catch, everybody.
You just watched a Michael Brooks Show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.